Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And today I'm just going to do a little short video about Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison, the highly influential speculative fiction and science fiction writer Harlan Ellison, who wrote mostly short stories, although he did write a few novels, but most of what he wrote in his career was short stories. And he also did a lot of work in television. He did a lot of teleplays, he did screenplays, he worked as a consultant on television shows. He did a lot of stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But mostly, he's known for his fiction, his science fiction. He's very well known in the science fiction community, although he referred to his own stuff for the most part as speculative fiction. So, yeah, speculative fiction. I'll go with that. Why not? Actually, he wrote a lot of different kinds of fiction that you can place in many different type of genres, but mostly really science fiction, and speculative fiction is actually a good enough description, I think. The reason I decided to do this video is because I missed David Wiley's birthday. The fantastic David Wiley, whose channel I will link down below, great booktube channel. I'm assuming you probably know about the famous David Wiley, but if not, check out his channel. So I missed his birthday, and on his birthday, he asked people who watched the video to, for his birthday, read a Harlan Ellison story. And I missed his birthday. So, because I was working and doing other things. So I missed it. So here I am making up for it in a tiny little way by doing a video about Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison, a guy I haven't actually talked about yet, which is a bit of a surprise. Harlan Ellison, I wrote a couple of notes down. I did minimum prep, as usual. Basically, I got his date of birth and death here. He was born May 27th, 1934, and he died June 28, 2018, which feels recent. It feels like it hasn't been that long since we've lost Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison is known mostly for his fiction, but it's hard to separate his personality from his fiction, and Harlan Ellison as a kind of combative character. That is the other thing he was very well known for. Being combative, argumentative, difficult, kind of a dick. Harlan Ellison. You know, when I talk about writers and their writing, I try to stick mostly to the writing, the work. The work is what's important. The work is what's going to endure. And when you deal with writers of any kind, very often you will find a flawed human being whose character is not spotless. Very often that's true. Particularly with writers who are older writers from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you know. And so I usually just try to not deal with it, because really when it comes to reading that stuff, you know, I don't think it's that important. It's not as important as the work. But in this case, it's hard not to talk about that, which is something you will occasionally come across in BookTube, people trying to deal with problematic writers, you know, whether they have racist views or sexist views or did terrible things in their lifetime. And yeah, Harlan Ellison is kind of like that. If you go to his Wikipedia page, you know, and you click the section that says controversies, you can just scroll down and keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling, and just, you can go all day, because the controversies, as far as Harlan Ellison is concerned, just goes on and on and on. This guy pissed off a lot of people, and very often those people were justifiably pissed off by Harlan Ellison. His behavior could be pretty bad, and sometimes really problematic. Like I said, I try to ignore that stuff usually. Whenever I talk about Isaac Asimov, for example, I don't go on and on, or I don't know if I've even mentioned that, he was a serial groper of women. And if he was around today doing what he did in his lifetime, he would probably be arrested. He probably would be in jail, deservedly so. Harlan Ellison wasn't a serial groper, although there is some of that going on with him as well. But yeah, he was one of those type of guys. And a lot of that anger and combativeness, a lot of that you could find in his writing. A lot of his writing sort of reminds me of a really pissed off Ray Bradbury. It's that kind of imagination at work, but a really pissed off imagination. He was really angry about a lot of things. He had a lot to say. He was very opinionated. And he did say at one time where somebody said something like, well, you're only writing just to shock people. And Harlan Ellison said, yes, exactly. That's what he was deliberately trying to do with a lot of his work. Although a lot of his work isn't like that. He had some breadth to him. He had a depth to a lot of his work. And so while a lot of his stuff is pretty angry, a lot of his stuff isn't. And so there was a lot of different kinds of writing that he did. And his short stories, they're more varied, I think, than he probably gets credit for. He was a great short story writer. And some of his short stories will probably last forever as classics of the science fiction genre, a couple of which I will mention. I'm not holding up my big Harlan Ellison book. I probably should. This is my big Harlan Ellison book. His collections of short stories are in a lot of different volumes. But this is the main volume that I keep in my library. This is the Essential Ellison, a 35-year retrospective, which is not a complete sampling of 35 years of his work, because that would be impossible. But this is actually, if you can find it, it's a pretty representative volume. It represents his work really well, and that it has a bunch of different stuff. It starting with some of the earliest things he wrote when he was just a kid, literally, to the later stuff when this was published. He did do a later version of this, a 50-year retrospective, which I can never find for some reason. This one I find lying around quite often. The 50-year I haven't seen. I don't know if they just printed fewer of those or what, but this one I see all the time. But there are a lot of great stories in this volume, and some of his individual volumes are really worth having just because of just how interesting the stories are. Ones that come to mind, probably the one that comes to mind is Deathbird Stories, an excellent collection if you ever find it. Great collection of very disturbing, dark stories, Deathbird Stories. Shatterday, I remember being pretty good. A lot of really good collections out there of Harlan Ellison. He wrote some early novels. He did Spider's Kiss, I believe, was a rock and roll novel. A lot of interesting stuff. So I'm going to go through this and just point out some of the stories he's best known for. I'll just go through the contents here. I won't say everything, but I wanted to see if I could find the stories that he is probably best known for. I probably should have done this ahead of time. Minimum preparation. Okay, what do we got in here? Okay. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream from 1967. One of the most disturbing stories you will ever read. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, about people in a kind of computer simulation. They're being controlled by this evil computer that hates them. And that's all I'll say about it. Some of his short stories you just have to experience. Trust me, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Really, really dark story. The Whimper of Whipped Dogs from 1973. Another really dark story. Really cool stuff. Let's see what else we have in here. Repent, Harlequin, Said the TikTok Man from 1965. I have seen that story in lists of the greatest science fiction short stories of all time, which gives you an idea of just how good that particular story is and how good Harlan Ellison was as a short story writer. He was very, very good at short stories. And short stories that was the format he was most comfortable with. That is the kind of thing he liked doing the most, short stories. A Boy and His Dog from 1969. I just saw a video on this the other day from Book Songs and Other Magic. That's a great video. That's a great channel. I'll try to link that down below too. But A Boy and His Dog from 1969 takes, it's about a boy and his dog in a post-apocalyptic wasteland that's full of violence and horror. So it's about what it says it is, A Boy and His Dog. It's about a kid that's trying to survive in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and he has a dog who is telepathic and super smart. And so they can talk to each other telepathically. And the dog basically is keeping this kid alive. And this kid loves this dog, and this dog loves him. But that's the only love that this kid really knows or understands. And his loyalty is really all to this dog for the most part, until he meets a woman. And what happens after that? I can't give it away. There's actually a lot of stuff that happens in that story. It's not a terribly long story. It's probably around 40 pages long or something like that from what I remember. But it's an excellent one. And while the dog had been keeping him alive in the story, he does make it up to the dog. This story has a heck of an ending. Let me just put it that way. He also is famous for Harlan Ellison. He did a teleplay for Star Trek called The City on the Edge of Forever, which is considered one of the greatest Star Trek episodes. And it is a fantastic episode. They did change some things from his screenplay, which pissed him off. One of the many things that pissed off Harlan Ellison. And he complained about that for decades. Although I think the changes that they made in that episode kind of made sense when you considered the kind of show it was. But, he was pissed. He often got pissed at that kind of thing. He did a couple really excellent Outer Limits episodes. Demon with a Glass Hand was a fantastic episode. And if you could only see one episode, I think, of the Outer Limits, that's probably the one to see. Famously, he sued the creators of The Terminator because he felt like it ripped off his stories, The Soldier and Demon with a Glass Hand. And it did, really. So he was justified in that, although he was suing people all the time. He remained angry to the end of his days, and he worked pretty much his whole life, although it slowed down quite a bit in his last decade due to health problems. He had some pretty serious health problems at the end. But he kept on working. He was a consultant on Babylon 5. He did a lot of stuff, Harlan Ellison. And certainly he should be read probably more often than he is. I don't hear him talked about too much anymore. And he was an important enough writer and a writer of quality. His work was quality work. And so he should be read more often than he is. And I guess that's all I have to say about Harlan Ellison this morning. It's early morning here when I'm filming this. So I will catch you next time here at Stately Vaughan Manor. And you guys have a great day.